Artistic Director of Photo 2021 International Festival of Photography. I'd like to begin this talk by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today, the Boon Wurrung and Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I pay my deep respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and to any Indigenous people that are joining us today or watching online. First of all, thank you to MPavilion for hosting this whole series of Photo Live in person for the first time, and to Creative Victoria for helping keeping these events free and accessible to everyone joining us. So this is the final event of the season. All the events have been featuring artists that have been commissioned to make work for Photo 2021, but especially artists that have been commissioned to make work in the public realm. And we're ending on a high note with the project that's definitely the most expansive, that stretches from Melbourne all the way to Sydney. And we'll be hearing more about this by the artist Rafaela Pandolfini. And to chair us and host us this evening is the director of Westspace, who are our wonderful partners in Photo 2021, and they have commissioned 3 projects that are presented as part of the festival. So I'll hand over to Amelia to introduce Rafaela and this project. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elias. Thanks everyone for being here. And before we begin, I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we stand, the people of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to extend my deepest respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and any First Nations people who are joining us today. As Elias said, I'm Amelia Walin. I'm the director of Westspace, and I'm joined today by Rafaela Pandolfini. And we are going to be discussing Rafaela's project for Photo 2021, which is called Myths and Facts. And I'm just going to let you know a little bit about Rafaela Pandolfini. She is a photographer and an artist who also works in the curatorial. And Rafaela explores feminine identity in the broadest sense, as well as the value of labour. And this project in particular is a huge, expansive body of work that Elias has already alluded to. It consists of 9 billboards, kind of processional series of billboards that span the Hume Highway between Sydney and Melbourne. It also exists as a series of music mixes, totaling 9 hours and 50 minutes to accompany the drive from Sydney to Melbourne down the Hume Highway. And then there's also a moving image component as well, which is currently installed in Collingwood Yards in the window of Soft Studios, a florist space on the ground floor at Collingwood Yards. So myths and facts, to give you a little bit of background from kind of a curatorial perspective before Rafaela speaks more about the research and her artistic process. Myths and Facts interrogates Australia's failure to address environmental violence at a policy level. The content of the billboards contain evasive phrases pertaining to the government's position on climate change, which have been transposed from the mouths of politicians onto chux cleaning cloths, which are a recurring element in Rafaela's work. There's a motif that she's been using for several years, and they sort of stand in to represent emotional, gendered labour. Or in this case, I like to think of them as kind of mopping up the mess or mopping up the kind of the excess or the crap that can come out of mouths of politicians. So the empty phrases, particularly when they're stripped of context, signal our government's disguise and deferral of the environmental emergencies that we currently face. And Rafaela, to open up the conversation, I'd love you to tell me a little bit about the research that's gone into this expansive project.
Yes, absolutely. So I had someone work with me, Mitchell Cummings, on the research, and he looked at the policies and related media from the LNP since they came into power September 2013 with Tony Abbott, and he looked through the all the kind of references to climate change from that time through to the beginning of the bushfire season in 2019. And he went through, I've just got an image of the spreadsheet here because that's kind of the start of it. And it went for pages and pages. And basically, as he went along, he kind of pulled out the repetitive phrases that they used, and the ways in which they used them and mixed them around and just kind of went on and on and on. And so those repetitions were what stood out to me with that. And then I had another two artists and writers, Audrey Schmidt and Ainsley Templeton, like create kind of poetry or, you know, wordplay on those repetitions. And from those poems, I pulled out the phrases that now sit on the billboards.
And from this research document, these press statements or politicians answering questions from the press, where did they come from?
Yeah, so their policy, I mean, I think the thing that Mitch found was that there actually wasn't much policy. So their policy documents, their media releases, their, you know, the attendance of you know, the Paris Agreement, their, you know, any kind of reference at all from the first moment they got into power to now. So that included things like, you know, when Tony Abbott got in, cutting the carbon tax, through to the, you know, the blackout in Adelaide, the Paris Agreement, and then, you know, on and on and on. So over that time, yeah, there's repetitions, but there's also a kind of very subtle shift where they go from, you know, there is no such thing as climate change, complete denial, through to a bit of a shift where they're almost kind of saying, we've always said that we believe in it, but it's, you know, we don't want to tax people, we don't want to do this, we don't want to do that. So it's, yeah, it just kind of very subtly shifts over the years.
That's interesting. And it's a very capped period of time. You said beginning 2023 up until the most recent, 2013.
2013, yeah, up until the beginning of the bushfire season.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Interesting. And maybe if we go through some of the slides, we can look at some of the specific language that's
yeah,
on
well,
the
should I
billboards.
show the video first?
Oh, yeah, let's show the video because we hear there's audio too.
Yeah, so on this video that two collaborators from New York made with me, Rad Mora and E-Jane, this is basically the, I don't know if that will play. This is basically the contents of the spreadsheet. I'm not sure if I have technically sound enough to make that play. It should be a YouTube. Oh, right. Okay. Oh, yeah, play. Oh, no, not play slideshow. Yeah, maybe just play there. Will that do it? No. Don't think so. It's gone all completely. Anyway, it is viewable. It's viewable on my Instagram, Westbase's Instagram, and on. Now I've lost the slideshow altogether. Oh, great. Yeah.
Yeah. So this video, to give some context, is an animation of the chux cleaning
I've done
cloth.
it again, Amelia. Yeah.
And there's an audio soundtrack, which is direct sound bites.
Yeah, quotes from the press releases or the, you know, like Parliament inquiries or, you know, whatever that may be.
Which have been combined onto this.
Yeah.
Well, let's go through to the next image, because these are some of the billboards that you can see dotted along the Hume Highway.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm curious in the wordplay in this one in particular, big stick energy.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so big stick, that's something that they say a lot, like cop it on the beat. Big stick actually is like I'm not sure the exact politician, it was like an American president's kind of like, using a big stick is like a very kind of like conservative party line, and this big stick energy was used on and on and on, like cop it on the beat, cop a big stick, we're going to use the big stick with these energy companies. It just went on and on and on, and then it kind of morphed into we're going to meet it in a canter with a big stick, and just kind of went, so I think it's, you know, in relation to the way that they are going to wield their power, and obviously, you know, because it's most usually men in power. So it's the way they're going to wield their power and the way they're going to come down heavy on the energy companies and ensure that they're not going to pass the, you know, tax on to consumers.
Yeah, right. And it's one of those phrases that's just empty enough to not stick with you until you have someone doing that kind of
Exactly.
incredible research of looking for repetition and looking for phrases, and that's when you start to realise how pervasive these empty phrases are and how a lot of language is just recycled.
Yeah, absolutely.
Could we look at the next one?
Yeah.
Okay, so this one says Crusade, tyranny, madness, voodoo, science. Is there a context behind those
Yeah,
words?
well, this was the wordsmith Audrey's pulled this out of the research. I think my understanding is that that's the type of terminology that's used around people like the Greens, I guess, who they would kind of refer to them being on a crusade, and like, you know, again, kind of like any mention back closer to 2013, 2014, 2015, when it was complete climate change denial, that was kind of the terminology that was used around, you know, is climate change real? You know how it was like we've been stuck in that actual conversation up until the bushfire season. I think that's when it actually shifted. So I guess that's how I read it. And then, you know, obviously the reality is that it was actually just science. It was none of those things.
Definitely wasn't, tyranny, crusade or madness. But this image speaks the most directly to the bushfire season that we just experienced.
Yeah.
And this is one of the few billboards that has a graphic element in terms of an illustration. There's two things I want to ask. I want to ask about the collaboration with a graphic designer and where this imagery came from.
Yeah.
And then I also want to ask about, you know, the bushfire season and how that shifted the direction of the work. So maybe you could speak about the graphic designer first.
So I would often work with graphic designers over my work, you know, for lots of reasons. But this is Elliot Shields, who's part of like a music. He does a lot of design stuff for fashion labels, actually, I think, and music. And he, I basically kind of like whittled down the lines that I wanted to use and gave them to him and explained the project. Like I always kind of like give a very thorough brief, and this really was the graphic that he came back with. And I think that I think that the drawing, he's kind of, I think he's sourced it from somewhere, but it's his placement of the imagery. But I think that designers, I personally find working with them some of the most incredible, like creatives. Yeah.
But what you gave him not only was the background to the work and then the research documents, but also the images of the chux cloths as well?
No, that kind of, So I gave them to him, and I created a lot of the other artworks and the painting. I did this one, but my daughters did most of the others. And so it really was just a constant combination of shuffling through. So he came back with the graphics, and then I would place them all over, like,
Right.
Actually, to start with, we hand drew them. Like in the past, in the previous exhibition I did, we hand drew them. But with billboards, like they have to be legible. This is in Albury, and it's right on the Hume Highway, so it really needs to be very readable. Like it can't be,
And that, we spoke about that earlier, and that is probably obvious to a lot of people, but wasn't obvious to me. But it's for driver safety. You can't have obscure-looking billboard without impacting safety of drivers. So it went through a couple of iterations like that.
Right. Yeah.
What are the markings on this one?
We use watercolour, like as Rosa, my daughters Rosa and Sabine said, it's actually the chux cloth is incredibly difficult to work with, you know, and so we did a lot of, you know, we were trapped like everybody inside over the bushfire season. We're in Sydney, and so I think we had a bit of a prolonged period where we couldn't really go out, you know. We were in Rosedale at the time. We got out, you know, a few hours before the whole of Rosedale was burnt to the ground. So it was very much like a very, on New Year's Eve, so it was very much a period of time that they knew about. You know, we have the news on in the car, like we're not going to not tell them what's going on. So it was quite a cathartic experience, I think. So, yeah. Yeah,
so this is in Albury, and there's been an earlier iteration of this project. It's also called Myths and Facts, and also used the chux cloths, but was in a different direction where it was looking at the legal definitions of assault.
Yeah. It was around consent.
Around consent, exactly. So for this project, when you started to realise it as a billboard project, specifically along the Hume Highway, the project shifted. So I'd love you to speak about kind of the site specificity of these billboards.
I mean, I'm from Melbourne originally, and so I would drive down from Sydney quite often, at least 2 or 3 times a year. And so I've seen these billboards. I mean, there's heaps of them along the Hume Highway that aren't really used, and so I'd always seen them as a space that would be a great way to have a project. I really believe in, very much like this whole festival, I very much work outside of, traditional gallery spaces. And so I do like artwork that is, out in the world for everybody to see, and not just the few people that go to the gallery, which is also great, but that's where I feel more comfortable. So the Downing Street exhibition was in the law courts and in the window boxes there, which surrounds the law courts, and that's kind of like Sydney's most prominent. I guess it's on the news every night. So that was around a time when, very much similar to now, we were looking at the rules around consent, and there's particularly horrific cases that were going on in Sydney at the time around consent and what that means, and how people keep getting away with what they get away with. So the language around that but it didn't feel, obviously it's pertinent all the time, but to me, to have it down the highway, after the bushfires, I think everyone was incensed. It felt like enough.
I specifically remember, trying to get from Sydney to Melbourne and just having sections of the highway closed and having the smoke and the conditions being so hazardous that it wasn't safe to travel, and that just being unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was, such a shock, I suppose. Could we go to the next slide? So this is one in a more urban location?
Yeah, that's on the Nepean Highway in Elstonwick.
Okay, great. And what's the graphic behind that?
Don't Be Afraid, that's Robert Milne, who's, I think he's based in the Netherlands. He's originally from Sydney. He's a designer as well. So the Don't Be Afraid is I would say is a very, very known phrase by Scott Morrison. It's like when he brought the coal in, I don't know how many, 5 years ago, he's like, this is coal, don't be afraid, and you're not supposed to bring props into Parliament. So, I just remember the articles after that, what an absolutely ridiculous stunt to pull. Especially that kind of that wording. Another one of them is needless anxieties on the billboard, and it's just kind of like, well, there is a lot to be afraid about,
Yes. And particularly, I find the billboards that have the artwork by your children particularly poignant as well.
Sure, yeah.
Because as we know, that generation are going to be inheriting, all the bad decisions or lack of decisions made about climate change policy. Do you have an image that we can show that shows their artwork?
That one's that's Sabine, that's another one on the
So it says hotter, drier, longer miracles.
Yeah, I think that's another Audrey piece of
so that's
brilliance.
That's the Needless Anxieties.
Yeah, that's the Needless Anxieties. That's in Seymour. Yeah, and that's the Needless Anxieties. That was Scott Morrison after kind of rebuking Greta Thunberg, I think, at the time, saying to children, I think, and the climate change rallies that she started. And so there was the first one by children, from school children in Australia, and he was kind of saying, they don't have, that's needless anxieties. I want children to be, have fun and, not have anxieties around this. And then literally, I think 2 months later was when the fires popped off, so...
And had you originally intended to collaborate with your children before you had that experience of kind of being shut inside due to smoke conditions? Had they always been part of the project?
No, I hadn't thought of that. I think that was I think that what's interesting on the chux is the markings, because, you know, they are well-known cloths, and, you know, at home they do, you know, if you reuse them, they do tend to get stains and things like that. And I think that's the most kind of, I guess, unsettling thing. But yeah, they just like, they very easily came out with these. It was like, you know, they pumped them out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And let's go to the next image. So when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine.
That's a really, that's at the Town Hall station, Platform 1 in Sydney. So that's like the main station within the city of Sydney, who also supported this project. And when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine was the infamous line that kept going on and on and on around the time of the Adelaide, when they were trying to kind of basically infer that solar, you know, doesn't work and doesn't last. Like, it's like what's happening in Texas at the moment. You know, they kind of like the power went out. It actually wasn't the reusable energy, but it was like a perfect kind of storm. Yeah. And I think that was a Tony Abbott line that just, when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine.
Yeah. The tactics of avoidance and excuse making, I guess, that comes across.
Yeah.
Let's also chat about the music component, which I mentioned in my introduction was designed as an accompaniment to that drive.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear, like, why collaborate with DJs? Why the intention to make that soundtrack?
Yeah, some of them were kind of music people, sound artists. I listen to a lot of mixes. That's, I guess my source of music. I've, very much always I guess it's a huge part of my artistic practice and, life. It's not my practice, my life. And so when we drive to Melbourne, or we go on a big drive, which we often do with the kids, we often listen to mixes. So a lot of the people who made the mixes for me, quite a few of them are from Melbourne, a few of them are from Sydney, and then one is my favourite London DJ who I listened to over the whole pandemic, and she does a lot of kind of nature sounds, Zakia, and who you can find on NTS, big shout out to Zakia. But the music, for me it's a really durational thing, and I really loved working with all of them. They came up with really thoughtful soundtracks. One of them in particular, I'd seen this guy who used to be in this band from Melbourne called Bum Creek, who I love, and he was in Rosedale at the same time. Dom and I, my partner and I, saw him on the beach, adult boogie boarding, which is Dom boogie boards as well. So he was like, "Oh, there's Sam from Bum Creek and CS and Cream," and then 2 days later we all had to leave Rosedale because of the bushfires, and so I got in touch with him and asked him to do a mix, and his mix was so thoughtful because I didn't realise, but it turned out that he'd been going to Rosedale for 25 years of his life and done lots of sound recordings down there. He ended up in the evacuation centre, all the houses in his street burnt down, and so he did all these sound recordings from the area, the regrowth, the past, the evacuation centre, so it's an incredible, and very cathartic for him as well, I think.
And how did the international collaborators engage? Because that's obviously an example of someone who has a lived experience of the bushfires, of being there at that time. Was it a harder conversation to have with international participants?
No, not at all. I think that, it's not that bushfire was, world news. and also it's not climate change isn't touching them as well. I think especially in America at the moment, and England, it doesn't, it most certainly didn't, it wasn't a stretch in any way. Yeah.
And did it feel important to have a balance of perspective rather than just a local
always,
response?
I think. Yeah, I think that's really important. Yeah.
I want to shout out to Jazz Money's mix as well, which was really
absolutely.
special.
That's
and another,
really beautiful.
Yeah, another really, I think there's a difference when people have done the drive before, reflecting on what they want to listen to when they do the drive versus someone from overseas who's speculating on what it might be like.
Yeah. So I think I've got... That's the one that's up at
Collingwood Yards.
Yeah, Collingwood Yards. Yeah, that's a famous line. Another famous line of Scott Morrison's, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's very pixelated. That's in Cleveland Street in Surrey Hills.
Handshakes, handbrakes.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a bit about that wordplay?
Well, I mean, handshakes is, I guess what goes on all the time, isn't it? It's the handshakes. And the handbrakes were what they were, like talking about the big stick they're going to pull on the handbrake, so I think it goes together perfectly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the final, that one's up at Enfield, again in Sydney.
The slogans have failed us.
Yeah.
And is this a direct quote or this one's a wordplay?
That's a direct quote. Yeah.
Wow. And then this is more artwork by your children in the background.
Yeah, that's Sabine's Crying Koala, which is pretty heartbreaking. And then, the image of the beach there with the coal and the, soot and stuff coming all over it.
Really nice.
Yeah.
We wanted to also, reflect on the theme for Photo 2021, which is the truth. And your project is not really about truth. It's about truth, but it's also about the avoidance of truth.
Yeah, absolutely.
The turning away, the failure to address, the ignoring and the kind of slipperiness of it.
Yeah.
And then I guess is there anything you want to say about truth and photography or this project and truth?
Look, I was listening to I was listening back to Hoda Afshar last night, and I thought that she really, I think that, I have always been, I entered, the art world as a photographer, and I also do documentary photography, and, but I definitely think there's she had a really great point about, it's worth listening back to, it's on the ABC Art Show, about, documentary photography and the issues around photography and how people have seen it as their right to take, photography into communities that aren't theirs and things like that. So I think that there's probably a bit of a problematic line around photography and truth as such. But certainly with the artists in this festival, they're kind of, addressing it in a very head-on way, which is great, really wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to think as well about, Photo 2021 being a new festival, and, this is the first iteration that we've just had, and, you are participating as a photographer, even though your work is kind of extremely expansive, including all the collaborators we just spoke of poets, graphic designers, researchers, musicians, sound artists, and DJs. And I wanted to ask, what are your, hopes for new festivals? What do you think festivals can be contributing now, or what do you want to see in the future of kind of festivals like this, particularly as someone who likes to work outside of gallery context?
Yeah. I guess, as I said, I think that all of the work really, I kind of, went to pull out some names, but I can't even, I think all of the work in this festival is really strong and important, and, it's really incredible the amount of work that people have put in to make this happen, especially considering, the pandemic. But, I also have to wonder, considering the state of the arts and, considering what we have just been through and what, where artists are at. Do we need new festivals? Do we need new art organisations? Do we need new, things when what we already have is so broken? I really feel like, we can't just pick up and carry on considering what has happened and not change. It's just not an option. And I think that, there is definitely a lot of change, happening. But, to me, when I see, and I, as an organiser, I only know this because I've done it myself, and I probably continue to do it. But, when I see a festival that says we've got 900 artists, or we've got 100 artists, or we've got, you got to think, well, 850 or 890 of those artists aren't getting paid, or aren't getting paid properly, or, kind of the Biennale or whatever, the more artists there are, the less artists are getting paid. Or people are getting paid properly, and that's the reality. And I think, there's a lot of change happening, as I said. I kind of in Sydney, I don't know as much in Melbourne, but in Sydney, there's Talia Smith at Granville, there's Luke at Kashula, there's Nanette at Albury, there's Sebastian who was at the Biennale, there's Justine Youssef at Narva. And, frankly, there's Clotilde at MCA, who should be the, head curator. These are all artists of colour or First Nations who are in kind of associate positions or deputy positions, and it's they should be the directors at the moment. We've been told again and again and again what we can do, and it's no use having people on the panels or commissioning artists or anything like that, because the money, one project, the artist, that doesn't help, that doesn't sustain change. Shout out to Sophie Side today for her post on Instagram about missing out on a particular position, and it's time for really, really important structural change to occur. It's time for people to step, us being, people who are in positions of privilege, to step aside. We've been told 1,000 times, how many more panels do you need?
Great point.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's kind of weaves throughout your practice. You have a really strong practice of paying all your collaborators, of sharing opportunities given to you with multiple people, and including multiple perspectives and voices on your project.
Yeah.
Disrupting the singular, comes across really strongly in this project and others.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, still lots more to do.
Yeah, still lots more to do, but I think that point of, it's not continuing business as usual,
No.
and the future of festivals has so much potential
Absolutely.
for change.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe we'll throw it out to the floor to see if there's any questions.
Thank you. This has been awesome. I was just curious about the project. It seems like it must have taken quite some time, because it's, there's a lot going on in the project, and I was wondering if you could talk to a little bit about the kind of time period you've made it. And then also working with those billboards, have you visited all of these sites, or how did you actually go about negotiating getting your work onto public billboards? I'm just sort of curious about that process, because it seems like it would be quite difficult and ambitious.
Yeah, right. Thanks. I think that the break that we had, the extra year with the pandemic, certainly grew the project, as much as I've just talked about not growing things. But that was, really wonderful to have that time and just kind of just make work for a year rather than just kind of, so that, I guess that's how it kind of expanded, I think. And, there were more, grant opportunities over that time. And so that's how it kind of expanded. In terms of the use of the billboards, I think Photo already had a relationship with OO. I think if you'd seen Clive Palmer's billboards across the whole country, pretty much anyone can put billboard. You can pretty much put billboard. Anyone can put billboards up, basically. So it was just about, I did know, it really was about how much they cost, and also, knowing that I wanted them to go from Sydney to Melbourne. So yeah, I just, it was a long, arduous process, and especially, I didn't think that they would put them up, but they didn't really care. I thought they might screen them, but as long as you could read the writing, they didn't mind. Yeah.
And you've visited them all in the past?
I have. Yeah,
week.
I've driven from Sydney, and I drove down the Hume, and I swerved off and got out
hard
and
to find
stood
them
on
all?
the side of the road. No, I knew relatively where they were. Yeah.
Hi, Elias.
Thank you for this. Rafaela, I love this project. I love the scope, the ambition of it, and the kind of processional route from Sydney. And I love that how it's occupying the space. I've always been a big believer in taking spaces that are perhaps used for one thing, be it advertising or otherwise, and make sure they're handed over to artists to make us, to challenge how we think about those spaces in the first place, but also to provide new opportunities to display and think about art. I couldn't agree more with you about the status quo. We need to change things, and we are, we're hoping that with this new festival, we're providing new opportunities, making sure we're looking, we're putting the artists first, making sure we're always paying them, etc. And that's so important, and also making sure that through the way that we're operating, we are providing opportunities for many artists from different backgrounds. That doesn't have one singular person defining or deciding who gets to be shown or how they get to be shown. And I think that's so important. Coming to a question, you just drove down from Sydney.
Yeah.
First of all, did you follow the route of the Hume Highway?
Yeah, I did.
And there's a whole kind of temporal, spatial, element to this. I was wondering if you can share how that experience actually was, because the planning of a project of this scale is one thing, but the delivery and experience is quite another. So
Yeah.
how was that for you?
Look, it was really nice, to be honest, to be on my own for the first time in a long time without my, beloved family. But, and I love big drives, so that wasn't a problem. And it's really exciting to see them and see that they did have impact, and they really popped out. So it was like it feels, like a relief, and it feels like it felt like a beautiful drive to do, to be able to kind of come all the way down and see them just sitting there doing whatever they're doing. It was a really nice experience.
We have an online question.
Okay.
As well. It's from Charmaine Lyons, who's coming into us online, which is beautiful for Photo Live, as this is how these talks were intended.
Yep.
The question's really quite simple. Will these billboards remain, or will they be removed after Photo 2021 Festival?
So billboards, something I never knew, is that they stay up for a lunar cycle. So I believe that's around 4 weeks. 3 weeks, so that they'll be up. But the other thing is that they are on not the most popular billboards around. So a lot of them, I would imagine, will stay up until somebody else decides to put their ad there. So I think especially the ones on the Hume will be there for a while. Okay.
Did we have any other questions? Oh, Audrey.
Oh, Audrey.
I just had a question about the kind of initial context for a lot of these slogans. There's a big difference between like a press release and an actual speech given. So a lot of the kind of more oratorical sort of instances where a lot of these like slogans and phrases and repetitions appear. What does it mean for you to then kind of make these things, so first of all, what's the difference for you between those two things? And then what does it mean to make it kind of so solid and concrete in kind of bold text in print?
I guess it's like, what was the first question? I forgot the first.
I'm a bit cooked. The first question was around the difference between something spoken and something written in the case of like political rhetoric.
Yeah, right. I guess what I've tried to do with these, and in finding the images that I thought paired well with them and the colours and the locations was to, I feel like basically, obviously, like to flip it back to see how ridiculous and untruthful, I guess, the things that they've said, and especially in regards to like climate change. Like I think that, yeah, if it's written or like, you know, presented in a video on the news or whatever, like it kind of like loses the punch. But if these particular slogans, to me, I've, you know, identified as ones that are repeated or are, you know, well known, or you know, you can really refer back to this particular government on. So, you know, I guess I feel like I'm, you know, flipping it back on them and, you know, hoping to, I guess, stamp out the untruth that they're supposed to represent in the first place. Yeah.
I should say as well that the music mixes can be listened to via Rafaela's Instagram and on SoundCloud and on Westbase offsite, as well as the video that we couldn't show. The full 9-minute video is available to be viewed online. It's kind of the intended format, even though we do have it installed. It works really well online, so please go watch it and listen and even do the drive. But you can't do it Melbourne to Sydney, so you have to fly to, you have to go there and then come back.
You have to go the other way because they're southbound.
Any final questions before we close up?
No.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Photo 21, for hosting us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, MPavilion.